Yep.
Okay, you can go
All
ahead.
right. Okay. All right. So hi everyone. So welcome to Budgeting 101, and I'm Michael,
I'm Sophia.
and we're your CNAS Scholars peer mentors for you guys, which are CNAS students. Next slide. Oh. So we'll be going over a couple different things, such as the cost of college, some basics about budgeting, and so like some tips maybe about budgeting as well, some different scholarship opportunities, and maybe our experiences going through the scholarship process, different job opportunities, maybe throughout campus or even off campus. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask us any further questions about what we're going over.
All right. Moving on. So thank you, Michael, for giving us a little rundown of what we'll be discussing today. So to start off, how many of us budget? Can I get in the chat just to see if any of us have been doing that lately? And what are some things that you've been spending money on? All right.
Nobody wants to share. We can answer it. Maybe to get them started. I don't know. Yeah.
I also can't see the chat, by the way.
Oh, you can't see the chat. Okay. So I guess. Well, someone said that I spent a lot of money on clothes from Shein. LOL.
I did the same thing. Okay.
No.
I can totally relate to that, at least like during quarantine. I've ordered from there a couple times, so definitely guilty. But yeah, how about you, Michael? Have you been spending money on anything in particular?
I'll just say spending money a lot on, I guess, groceries and clothes as well. Because I mean, it's kind of, I mean, obviously any time you do an activity, even when we're off campus, you definitely want to prioritize what you wear and especially what you eat, right? You want to make sure you're well enough during this COVID pandemic to, yeah. How about you, Sophia?
Yeah, so I mean, personally, mine has been a lot of coffee and caffeine. And as much as it seems like a need, it's definitely a want. I don't need to go every day with a cup of coffee, but it is what it is. But yeah, moving on, can someone share why they think budgeting is important, or do you have any strategies yourself that you utilize?
I personally think budgeting is like really important because like if you don't, like keep a budget, like what you're spending and stuff, it can get out of hand and it's just like not good.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing, Rachel. So as we go on throughout this PowerPoint, we'll be highlighting a bunch of different ways and strategies in which we can all successfully budget. But yeah, so moving on, like we've mentioned, keeping a budget is important because college can be costly. Um, so on average, dorming ranges from around $6,000 to $17,000, which is a lot. But some ways that you can save include maybe living at home, living at an off-campus housing, or apartments, or even cooking your own meals help as well. Let's see. Can we guess how much the average student spends on books and school supplies? You can unmute or put in the chat. Okay, we got $1,000. Let's see. So yeah, it's around that range. So 1,300 is what we've found. And my best advice is to rent or buy used books. Maybe with enough searching too, you'll be able to find some PDFs online for free. Even the Orbach and Rivera libraries at school also have some books reserved. I know you're able to rent those books as well. In these COVID times, I actually just reserved a book and I picked it up at the drop-off location. But during the school year, when everything's open, I typically just rent out the book for an hour or two, and then I scan the pages, and then just do that as I go throughout the quarter so I can avoid purchasing the text. And moving on, so how much do we think the average college student spends on transportation? Okay, 500. Surprisingly, it's a lot more than what we think how much books and school supplies cost. So it's around $14.50, and this can include gas, Ubers, any other transportation costs. And of course, some ways to eliminate that is either biking or walking to school, or even taking the public transit, which is the RTA here. And if you show your student ID, it's actually free. But yeah, so moving on.
Yeah, so we're going to go over kind of the costs of undergrads. So first we'll go over if you're a California resident. So you might have seen this in your RWeb under financial aid. It kind of gives you a good idea of how much you would be spending altogether. So in terms of tuition and fees, that doesn't really change from quarter to quarter. So it's around this amount, so 11,000. And then the campus fees, depending on what's being maintained and different things like that. It's around this price of $2,000. And health insurance, so this is a really important one that you might want to take note of. There's this thing called the UC SHIP. So if let's say that your parents already have health insurance, you can waive the health insurance that would be given by UC SHIP. So that amount might be lower depending on whether your parents have health insurance or you have health insurance already. And then room and board. So room and board, we kind of already went over. Sophia did a good job of that. You can definitely limit now, especially during COVID, right? A lot of us maybe might be at home, so this price might not be nearly as high. But definitely, when we do resume back on campus, there are different ways you can limit the amount you spend on room and board, such as off campus, maybe on campus housing if you find a good way of having a good budget and things like that. So then there's also textbooks and supplies. So one thing that Sophia didn't mention was also what you could do is potentially, so scanning is one. You can also find PDFs, right? Maybe potentially PDFs online work for cheaper. Also for supplies. So a big supply now obviously is using your laptop and having internet connection. So a good resource would be Loan to Learn. So that's a resource where undergrads are provided laptops if they don't have it. So and there's also the R Pantry as well that might fit your budget. Transportation, like we mentioned, the R Bus. Also, in terms of if you have a car, right, you might be spending a lot of money on gas when we're on campus. I would say this is not as big of a deal now during the pandemic. And personal expenses, that includes like clothing, food, like I mentioned, the R Pantry, and yeah, just overall personal expenses for California residents. And so for non-residents, so this one, so when we're looking at this, we can see that people who don't live, who don't reside in California, the tuition's basically the same so far. So looking at it, it's like 11,000. But when we look at the non-residential supplemental tuition, that is almost 3 times as much. So you want to keep in mind if you are a non-resident, how much you are spending tuition-wise. It's going to be around 3 times as much. So these other categories, you might want to make a stronger budget for these things, right? So health insurance, like I mentioned before, UC SHIP, you can waive that. Room and board, try your best to see what apartments or things are available, textbooks and supplies. There's definitely online resources with that. Transportation, you could definitely take the R Bus. You can definitely carpool with a friend, and personal expenses. You could definitely try to limit that as well with like the R Pantry and other things.
All right, so now we'll just lay down like the budgeting basics. I know it can be overwhelming at first, but once you find what works for you, you'll be smooth sailing from there. So first, to start off, you should reflect on your priorities and your goals. So that may be food, school purchases, hobbies, or maybe you've been saving up for a trip or vacation in the future. That might not happen now because of COVID, but then you can design a budget based off of those plans that you have and make sure that they're frequent or infrequent and very small changes. Any abrupt changes typically won't last very long. So I always say that baby steps are important, work your way up. So for example, for me, like I mentioned, like coffee is something that I spend so much money on. Maybe I can try to control that by limiting myself to maybe 1 drink a week or giving myself a budget to spend every month. I could also invest in a coffee maker. Yeah, but lastly, try to track your results, find what does and doesn't work for you. And then from there, you can tweak the budget that you've made. And also, another really big important thing is to you're budgeting to kind of create like emergency fund as well, because we are like in these COVID times. No one expected this to happen, right? So it's always good to just have money like saved and laying around just in case like emergencies do happen, and you're kind of scrambling to find money to spend on groceries and I don't know, housing, etc. All right, so now that we're all in college, we'll definitely have like more serious financial responsibilities as we begin adulting, I guess. But college students may consider like borrowing money through either loans or credit cards. So it's important to get familiar before borrowing such large amounts of money, and to know what kinds of fees to expect and avoid. So we won't go too much in depth in this PowerPoint. However, we'll discuss some important concepts. So here are a few terms that are important to understand to keep yourself accountable with a credit card. So for annual fees, it's something that you get charged for having a credit card. It's usually for like cash or travel rewards. A late payment fee is something that you're charged for making a payment after its due date. An over the limit fee is for borrowing more than what you are approved for. So typically with credit cards, sometimes you have a $500 spending budget, and it can always increase up to maybe like $1,000, $2,000. It just depends on where you stand. And then a cash advance fee is a fee that you get for withdrawing money through your credit card. I'd also like to mention that when you're searching for a credit card, be on the lookout for cards with no annual interest for the first 12 to 18 months, just to avoid spending extra money that you don't need. To. And then on the right is a sheet that reflects the interest that builds on either loans or credit cards before you borrow. Especially with credit cards, it can increase with bad credit, which is something that we'll get to in the later slides.
Yeah, so we're going to continue on with banks and credits. So like Sophia mentioned, you definitely want to be aware of those different types of fees. There are different, like I know for sure Bank of America is one of those banks that really lowers the amount of fees that you would have as a student, and it would also set your minimum balance, whatever you would need to have in your bank would be a lot lower. So those are some things you might want to check out a couple banks and see what's available and then make a decision on that. So, definitely you want to make sure you're not overspending, right? So the temptation to overspend is something that can definitely hinder your budgeting, right? Like we mentioned before, all the different amounts of money that you're going to spend if you're a California resident or a non-resident can definitely pile up, and then eventually you would try to avoid doing things like take on a loan or different loans and such like that. And then also another important thing to mention, your credit score. So your credit score is something that will allow you to do things like we'll mention on the future slides, but it'll allow you to do things such as like buy a car or, potentially buy a house, right? Get a loan for a house. So things like that. So make sure you're not irresponsibly using your credit card. And there's different ATMs that are located at the hub. So there's the different banks. If we were on campus, you could go to one of those banks and obviously deposit or withdraw some money. And yeah. Next slide. So now we'll be going over what a credit score is. So a credit score is basically where whatever, if you're, let's say you spend money on your credit cards, let's say you spend around like maybe $50 to $100 for that specific month, and then you need to be able to pay that back within the next month, right? To show that you are a good spender and you're a reliable customer of the bank. So here we can take a look at the chart. So we can see around like 600. So that's usually where you start at. You usually start like at a neutral score. And then if you do start to pay off different things with your credit card and making sure you pay on time, that's an important thing, paying on time, your credit score will increase, right? And you can see on the chart that different mortgage rates, auto loan rates, they'll decrease as you get a better credit score, right? So, and then the only way you would lower your credit score is if you're not paying on time, right? So making sure you are paying on time, you are budgeting, you are making sure maybe with a spreadsheet, like in the last slide, to make sure you are spending the amount you think you can spend every month. And you can definitely go to these websites. And your credit score is also known as your FICO score, so you can find out on these websites more about that.
All right, so yes, well, like we mentioned before, you can budget using spreadsheets, but nowadays we all have phones and stuff, right? So it could be more convenient to just utilize a few apps. So here we have a few examples like Toshi Finance. I think it's great because it has a very simple interface, making it really easy to set up monthly budgets. And all you need to do is add your income and your expenses. And again, it's super nice because you can set up limits. So for example, for groceries, you can allot maybe $30 a week. You can put up rent, like maybe $5.50, things like that. So if you're approaching the limit or you've gone over, the app will alert you. Again, it's nice to keep accountability when you're budgeting. Next is left to spend. You set an allowance and then it subtracts as you go. It's simple in that you don't get caught up in like the minute, very complicated budgeting details that you can come across. And there are others such as like Wally, Good Budget, Personal Capital. But I really like to use Mint only because you can directly connect it to your bank account. So it can track all of your purchases, and it can also help with budgeting and saving, in that you don't have to keep logging in separate transactions and all of that stuff as well. All right, so moving on, again, here are more examples of how to budget using a spreadsheet. So if you don't want to utilize an app, look into some examples of these online. So a few of these are from Excel, and you can project your costs for the month, for the year. But I understand that budgeting can be a bit complex, so it doesn't have to, look like any of these shown here. You can just start with a few simple columns on a Google Sheet and work from there, of course.
Yeah, so let's go over, so what are some ways you can save money? Does anyone have any ideas?
I would say like a way to save money definitely is like maybe like if you're going, like say you go out a lot, like only take like $20 or like $15 and say, okay, like this is what I'm gonna spend like today or like this week, so that you don't overspend.
Yeah, that's a good idea, right? Making sure you have a number in your head of how much you're going to spend at a restaurant or a dine-in place, and making sure you're not overspending, and then that leading to a potential worsening of your credit score, right? If you're using your credit card, maybe some other ways can definitely be seeing how much you're like making if you have a job, right? Seeing how much you're making, and then how much you're outputting, right? So seeing how much you want to save and how much you want to spend each month, maybe creating a spreadsheet or using the apps like Sophia mentioned. That could be a really good way of tracking how you can save money. Does anyone else have any ideas? No? Okay. We can just move on to the next slide. All right, so let's go over some tips how to save money. So make your own coffee, right? So Sophia mentioned how she really likes to spend money on coffee. So making sure that you can maybe make your own coffee, right? And doing like your own things of making food, make like learning how to cook, right? Those are some, so it's good to save money, but you can also take away some skills, right? So you can learn how to make coffee, you can learn how to cook different foods and meal prep and, making sure that you are budgeting, right? Those are all different skills that will definitely help you with other things, academically and socially, right? You could also live with a roommate or with family. So now, especially, you might be living with a roommate or with family, and that might be helping you lower the cost of room and board than what you would have been spending if we were on campus, right? And also, we mentioned transportation. So definitely, you can walk to campus. So walking to campus, but you want to make sure that you are a good distance away from the campus. So checking Google Maps and seeing maybe you're like a couple miles away. If you're too far away, you might want to consider taking the RTA bus and then seeing on their schedule where the bus stops are there. And also carpooling, right? So carpooling, if you know someone with a car, maybe you can split the money on gas and do things like that. If you have a bike, definitely make sure you get a bike lock wherever you go. And also, you can get some used textbooks or rent them from the bookstore. So now you could definitely, like I mentioned before, you can go online, you can get some textbooks like PDFs. They're not as expensive as getting a physical textbook most of the time, so that could be something. You can also rent a textbook. I believe you could do it through UCR still with the libraries, so that could be something you might be interested in. So I mentioned before, so renting laptops. So Loan to Learn is a really good program for that. If it's free to students, if you don't have a laptop, definitely, make sure you can get one of those, especially now during Zoom. And also another thing, so looking at the pictures here, so CalFresh. So CalFresh is a really big program that I think might be of interest to you. So it's basically a program where if you do meet one of their requirements, such as being on Cal Grant or you're working maybe 15 to 20 hours a week, you might be eligible for CalFresh. And then once you do have to apply for the program, but if you do get accepted into the program and you go through the process, you'll get an EBT card, so basically a debit card with around $100 to $200 a month, and you can use that at different stores such as 7-Eleven or Walmart to really make sure that you are expanding your budget as much as you can as a college student. Okay.
All right. But yeah, so thank you, Michael, for mentioning all of those resources. So here are a few more. So I'd like to really emphasize utilizing the campus amenities, like free tutoring at the ARC, you know, pre-COVID, like going to social events to get free food. So definitely make use of the tuition that you're paying. It's expensive. And by going to the SRC, even though the gyms might not be open right now, you can still rent out gym equipment. So I would definitely check out their website at src.ucr.edu to see how that works. Or you can even go to the Well. There they have a little program where you can track your steps if you have like an Apple Watch or utilizing your iPhone as well, and you get rewards in return, whether that be like free UCR gear and whatnot. Next is to not grocery shop when you're hungry. I personally do this all the time, and I always overbuy or buy things that I won't even end up eating. Like Michael mentioned beforehand as well, is to utilize the R Pantry. So the R Pantry is a resource that helps students fight like food insecurities. So if you happen to be in the Riverside area right now, they are still open. Again, head on to their website or even their Instagram to see the times that they are open. All you have to do is show your UCR ID, and it's completely free. They have basic groceries, grains like rice, oats, and canned foods, things, necessities that you might need, as well as like diapers and like baby formula. They have like all types of things there. So I recommend checking it out. Next is to shop at places with student discounts. So definitely in the Riverside area, most of the small businesses here actually give out student discounts if you show your ID. Next up is with printing. Maybe you don't want to buy a printer or you don't have one, but each student has a $7 credit worth of printing pages. And there are WEPA machines that allow you to do so, and they're spread out throughout campus, which we don't have access to now, but it's good to know. They're also available in the library. And lastly is to skip out on vacations and go for alternatives. So especially now that we're unable to travel as much, you can definitely use this time to either seek out a job or seek out volunteer opportunities, enhance your resume, and even save up money for those future vacations when things start to get better. But yeah, so some ways to pay for college. This can include any grants, scholarships, or participating in work study. So for grants, I recommend applying to FAFSA, even if you feel like you won't qualify, just because there are tons of scholarships that automatically are applied to each student if you qualify, and that can be Pell Grants or middle class scholarships. And it's really nice to look into scholarships outside of what FAFSA gives you, only because not many people take advantage of it, believe it or not. So there's so much free money kind of just floating around and waiting for someone to take up on that opportunity. There's actually a continuing student scholarship that's offered at UCR as well, and that's available from it's November now, so it's available from November to March. So I definitely consider looking into it and applying. CNAS also offers scholarships as well. However, the deadline ended over the weekend, but I would, anticipate it each school year. So just know that it exists. And lastly, it's participating in work study, which is what we will touch on later.
Yeah, so there are different ways that you can look into scholarships. So there's these different websites. Personally, for me, I've used College Board. College Board is a really good website where you can basically narrow down what specifically you want. So let's say you're interested in something or you are looking to get an academic scholarship. So College Board has a big variety of scholarships, but there's also some good ones here. And also there's a really good program called the Financial Wellness Program, where they have even more information about scholarships and different things to be financially well, in addition to this PowerPoint. So there's some really good websites. So cnasstudent.ucr.edu, that's a good website where you can find general information about being a CNAS major on top of finding scholarships that are related to CNAS. Like Sophia mentioned, you definitely want to keep in mind about the continuing student scholarship that's available from November to March, and then the CNAS specific scholarships is always during the month of October. So just making sure that you do fill out those scholarships to the best of your abilities, because those can definitely help you pay off any tuition or loans that you might have. Yeah, so now we'll be talking a little bit about employment, so specifically on-campus employment. So there's a lot of different work available on campus, so over 6,000 workers at UCR. So definitely keep in mind, you want to make sure you balance your academic, personal, and your work life. So making sure you work between 10 to 15 hours a week is something vital to your success here at UCR. Handshake is another great website. If you go onto Handshake and make a profile, you can be exposed to different events with employers that go over the information about their industry. There's also job fairs. They also have listings for part-time and full-time jobs. Another thing, it's associated with the Career Center. So Handshake is associated with the Career Center, and they can check over your resume and cover letter. Those may be important potentially if you are looking for a job, or even for an internship, right? If you want to gain some experience in an internship. So some perks of working on campus, definitely you gain some great experience. You get to work with other undergrads maybe some academic advisors. You get to work with a large variety of people, because we know at UCR, there, we are one of the most diverse UCs, and we do have a lot of different ways of socializing with other people, right? So you can socialize with other students, staff, and faculty. So definitely keep that in mind. It's a good way of really making sure you're engaged with campus. And another thing with on-campus employment, it's really flexible, right? So it works around your schedule, your school schedule, or maybe other things that you have during the day. It can definitely on-campus employment can work with that. And if you are able to qualify for work study, so this is something that was in the FAFSA, like on Sophia's slide. If you are eligible for work study, definitely take advantage of that, because you either use it or you lose it, right? So if you only get work study for your first year, definitely make sure you use it for that first year. You can establish those relationships, and then maybe if you don't have work study the following years, you already built that relationship. It might be easier for you to maintain any sort of employment on campus.
All right. So yeah, like Michael mentioned, Handshake is a really important resource to use in terms of job searching, internship searching as well. So it is an online database through the Career Center, and I'd like to say it's pretty similar to LinkedIn. It's able to match you with employers based on your GPA, your major, experience, graduation year, etc. And all you have to do is use your net ID to log in. And again, as part of your profile setup, you have to upload a resume and a cover letter. So Michael mentioned this already, but you should definitely seek out the Career Center for any resume or cover letter help. They have a bunch of workshops posted to their website that you can look at, and also like sample resumes as well, and it goes by major. So if you're a biology major, psychology, they have that there. You can also make an appointment with someone who works there to look over your resume live and walk you through it. So for example, here are some jobs unique to CNAS. So like Michael and I were both CNAS Scholars Peer Mentors. You can be a Persist Peer Mentor or even a grader for the Learning Community classes. But yeah, so these jobs that are listed right here, be sure to keep an eye out on maybe your your RMail or like the CNAS newsletter, just to see when all of these job postings or listings become live, just because it's really great experience and a great way to get involved on campus as well, aside from the monetary reasons. And next up is work study. So work study is basically a program where students are able to work part-time jobs on campus, allowing them to make up money to help pay for their tuition. So you can qualify through FAFSA, just as long as you demonstrate a financial need and you accept that award, then you have your work study. So in order to keep your work study allocation, like Michael said, you either use it or you lose it. So if you don't use it your first year, it's most likely not going to pop up as an option again on your FAFSA. So make sure to utilize it one way or another during your first year. I know because of COVID right now, they actually have some accommodations regarding work study. So I would look into their website just to double check what those are. But yeah, again, if you are having trouble trying to find a job for work study, I would refer to their website once again, because they do have a step-by-step process. And it'll also open some doors of specific positions you can apply for that are looking for work study specific students.
Yeah, so like Sophia mentioned about work study. So work study is definitely something you want to use. Even if you don't have work study, don't be discouraged at all. You can definitely find an on-campus job without work study. Just make sure, use the resources that are available, like the Career Center, making sure you are professional and when you interview. So things like that, just keep that in mind. And, as you experience the different things on campus, you'll definitely build that you'll build that confidence and you'll definitely find something out there. So now we'll go over undergraduate research. So there's definitely some really great research opportunities on campus. So one that I highly recommend is RISE. Definitely, I've heard a lot about it. It's a 10-week summer program where you would basically work full time, around 36 to 40 hours a week. You would get a $5,000 stipend to cover any potential costs. And you would, once you are working under a professor, you can apply for this program. And under this program, you can definitely learn some great transferable skills and some lab skills if you are looking to maybe potentially go to a graduate school just related to research, or even just using it as an experience. That's just something that I would recommend. There's also some really good ones like Mark Ustar. I know Mark Ustar has some great workshops and different events with speakers from like UCLA, UCF, right? Oh, sorry, UCSF, right? UC San Francisco, and just attending those events, and you can also apply for this kind of program. Will allow you to really gain those skills and experiences that you are looking for in your undergrad. There's also some great off-campus research opportunities as well listed here. Just keep in mind, making sure you are able to go to these events. Maybe now you can attend some of these events via Zoom, but definitely when everything resumes, making sure that you are able to maybe find some sort of transportation. So that's why on-campus research is definitely something you might want to look into. Yeah. Any questions?